Hello, I am H. Paul with a new story that will gently lead you into a deep sleep within 20 minutes. So please, close your eyes and journey with me into the land of dreams. The town of Elmswood was quiet after sunset. It always had been. Most people said it was the kind of town where time simply forgot to hurry. The main street closed down by 8 o'clock, the diner lights flickered off one by one, and the sound of dishes clinking in the back kitchen was the last thing anyone heard before the stillness of night settled in. At the edge of town, an old man named Walter Briggs lived alone in a two-story wooden house that creaked every time the wind brushed past it. The porch boards were uneven, the paint on the shutters was fading, and the rocking chair outside had a soft hollow in the seat from years of use. Every night, Walter came out to sit there. Not to think, not to talk, not to do anything, just to sit and listen. Because somewhere, far in the distance, he knew the midnight train would come. He didn't know exactly when it started, or why he began listening for it. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was comfort, but for more than 30 years, he had sat on that porch at night, waiting for the sound, the soft, steady hum of the train wheels rolling along the steel tracks through the valley. It always came right on time, and when it did, the night seemed to breathe. At 11:58, Walter looked at the clock inside his living room through the open door. He didn't wear a watch anymore. He didn't need to. The train was always his clock. He sat with his blanket wrapped around his shoulders, a mug of tea slowly cooling beside him. The stars were faint, hiding behind thin clouds, and the air smelled faintly of pine trees and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, and then silence returned. Then, faintly, like a whisper at the edge of hearing, came the sound. A low rumble, soft and distant. Walter smiled to himself. Right on time. The train always came from the west, running past the riverbank, over the small bridge, then into the valley that cut across Elmswood's edge. The sound was too faint unless you were awake, alone, and listening. But Walter heard it every night. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just steady, the slow clatter of wheels on steel, the rhythm of something that never rushed. He took a long breath, feeling the cool night air in his chest. He thought of all the years that had passed, all the nights he'd sat here, and how nothing had really changed. The world was busier now. The town had a new supermarket. Kids had phones instead of bikes. But the midnight train sounded exactly the same as it did when he was young. The thought made him feel safe. He leaned back, the chair creaking softly beneath him. The sound of the train grew clearer now, not close enough to see, but close enough to feel. The faint vibration reached the porch floorboards, barely noticeable, but real. And then, for a few minutes, the night was alive. The train moved through the valley, its wheels clicking in a rhythm that could have been a lullaby. Walter closed his eyes. He imagined the train cars, empty, maybe gliding past fields, past barns, past the quiet outskirts of towns like his. He imagined the engineer up front, steady hands on the throttle, eyes half-tired but calm. And just like that, the sound began to fade. Within minutes, the rumble softened again, slipping away into the dark distance, leaving only the crickets and the soft sigh of wind. Walter didn't move for a long while. He sat there, eyes half-closed, listening to nothing. It wasn't loneliness. It wasn't sadness. It was peace, the kind that only comes when you have nothing left. When the air grew colder, he picked up his mug, now empty, and whispered quietly to himself. "See you tomorrow, old friend." He stood, stretched his back, and stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. The old house creaked again, but Walter didn't mind. He liked the sound. It was familiar. He turned off the last light, leaving the world outside to its silence, and walked upstairs to his bed. The next morning came quietly, as mornings always did in Elmswood. Sunlight slipped through thin curtains, painting pale stripes across Walter Briggs's small bedroom. Birds chattered in the maple tree outside, and somewhere down the street a truck door closed. Then an engine started. Walter woke slowly, the way old men do when there's no schedule waiting for them. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, letting his feet find his slippers. The air smelled faintly of coffee from the neighbor's kitchen, drifting through an open window. Downstairs, The wooden floor moaned under his steps. He filled the kettle, set on the stove, and stood watching the steam begin to rise. Everything in his kitchen had a story. The chipped blue mug, the clock that ticked 3 minutes slow, the calendar frozen on last December because he'd forgotten to change it. But he didn't mind. Nothing urgent ever happened here. He poured the coffee, took the first slow sip, and looked out the window toward the railway line he couldn't quite see. Only a row of distant trees marked where it ran. He thought about the train again. He always did. He'd been listening to it since he was a young man, since the days when freight cars carried timber from the hills and coal from the river towns. He used to work nights at the old depot, sweeping floors, checking cargo lists, and watching the engines roll under the yellow platform lamps. Those nights were long and quiet, and he remembered how the rails would hum before a train arrived, like the earth itself was taking a deep breath. Sometimes he missed that sound more than anything else. He carried his coffee out to the porch. The sun was up now, warming the white paint that peeled along the railing. A few kids rode bicycles down the street. The postman waved. Walter nodded back. He wasn't much for conversation these days, but the rhythm of life here, steady, gentle, suited him fine. By noon, he'd watered the small patch of garden by the steps, read half the newspaper, and fallen asleep in his chair. When he woke again, the light had changed. Shadows stretched long across the yard. The day had slipped quietly toward evening, just as it always did. He fixed a simple dinner, soup from a can, a slice of bread, a small apple, and ate slowly at the kitchen table. The old wall clock ticked, filling the silence. He thought again of the train that would come later. It was strange, he mused, how the train had become a kind of companion. Not a living friend, not a person to talk to, but a pattern he could count on, a line of sound through every night of his life. Some people had radios, some had family visits. Walter had the midnight train. When the dishes were done, he carried his chair cushion outside and settled on the porch once more. The sky was turning soft blue at the edges. Crickets had already begun their nightly tune, and the breeze smelled faintly of grass and wood smoke. As twilight deepened, he noticed the lights across town flicker on, one house at a time, like stars appearing on earth. He watched them, unhurried. He had nowhere else to be. At a little before midnight, he heard it again, that faint far-off rumble beginning beyond the ridge. He smiled without realizing it. The train rolled through the night as faithfully as the moon climbed the sky. Walter leaned back and listened. Every sound was familiar. The click-clack rhythm, the low metallic moan as it curved through the valley, the distant horn that echoed once and then again. He thought of the men inside the locomotive cab, perhaps younger fellows now, faces he didn't know. He imagined them sipping coffee from thermos cups, their eyes fixed on the silver rails ahead, unaware that anyone in Elmswood still listened. For a few minutes, he pictured himself on board, sitting by a window, watching the town lights drift backward into darkness. He'd ridden plenty of trains in his youth, but in his mind the journeys were always peaceful. The hum beneath his feet, the soft sway, the endless ribbon of track disappearing into night. The sound grew stronger, closer. It reached the porch, the air, the wood beneath his chair. Then, slowly it began to fade again. Walter breathed out, long and slow. Every night was the same, and that sameness was its own kind of comfort. When the final echo vanished, he stayed a while longer, eyes half closed, letting the crickets fill the silence left behind. The clock inside struck 12. He felt his eyelids grow heavy. Another day done. Another train gone. Tomorrow would come exactly the same way, and that was perfectly fine with him. He stood, stretched, and whispered the words he always did. "Good night, old friend." Then he stepped inside and closed the door softly behind him. The porch light flicked off, and the quiet of Elmswood settled once more. Morning drifted softly over Elmswood again, golden light spilling across rooftops and telephone poles. Walter woke early this time, though he didn't need to. Old habits never really left, he supposed. He brewed his coffee the same way he always had. 2 scoops, no sugar, and sat by the window. The steam rose lazily into the still air. Across the street, the mail truck stopped with a gentle hiss, the postman stepping out, his boots crunching over gravel. The day began exactly as it always did. That sameness, that steady rhythm, was something Walter had grown to love. After breakfast, he pulled out a small wooden box from a cabinet. It was scuffed and faded, but he kept it neat, a sort of museum of his own life. Inside were old photos. His wife, Martha, smiling on their wedding day. His son, Danny, holding a toy train. A photo of the Elmswood train depot back when it was busy, engines lined up like shining giants. He lifted the photo of Martha and smiled. She'd passed more than 20 years ago, but in his mind, she was always young, hair pinned neatly, eyes bright, standing on that same porch where he now sat alone. Martha had loved the train too. Back in those early years, they'd hear it together every night. She'd lean against the doorway, listening to the distant horn. Sometimes she'd laugh softly and say, "That's our lullaby, Walter." And it had been. Even after long, tiring days at the depot, the sound of the midnight train felt like a signal that everything in the world was still running as it should. When Danny was small, he'd stay up late just to hear it. Walter remembered those nights, the boy's small feet padding out to the porch, his blanket dragging behind him. "Can we see it tonight, Dad?" he'd whisper. Walter would shake his head. "Not from here, son. It's too far off." But they'd listen anyway, side by side, until the rumble faded away. Those nights were his favorite memories. Simple, quiet, ordinary, and yet perfect. Now the house was silent. No Marta, no Danny, just the creak of the porch, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint whistle of the wind outside. Danny had moved west long ago. A job, a family, a new life. They still spoke sometimes, but not often. Time, Walter thought, had its own kind of distance, longer than miles, quieter than silence. He didn't mind. He had his memories. He had the train. And in a strange way, that was enough. The rest of the day passed unhurriedly. He fixed a loose fence post in the yard, read the same newspaper twice, then sat watching the clouds shift slowly across the sky. By dusk, he made a small pot of stew. The air turned cooler, and the porch light flickered on again. He took his seat. Same chair, same blanket, same quiet routine. He looked toward the valley and waited. At 11:57, the first faint tremor reached his ears. There it was again, steady as ever. He felt that familiar calm settle over him. The rhythm of the train reminded him of Martha's heartbeat when he used to rest his head against her shoulder. It reminded him of Danny's small hands pressing against his, both holding the edge of the porch railing, waiting for that distant horn. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he could almost hear them beside him. Martha's soft humming, Danny's quiet excitement. It wasn't sadness, it was memory. Warm, slow, and full. The train rolled through the night, unseen but certain. The sound filled the valley, spread through the town, reached even this small house at the edge of Elmswood. Walter whispered, "You're right on time." And the words hung in the cool air, gentle as the sound itself. The train passed. The night grew still again. He leaned back, feeling the chair rock softly beneath him. He thought about calling Danny tomorrow, maybe just to say hello. But for now, he simply listened to the quiet. It was enough. The moon was high when he finally rose, his joints stiff but his mind peaceful. He took one last look toward the dark horizon and murmured the same words as always. "Good night, old friend." The next afternoon in Elmswood was soft and gray. A light drizzle brushed the rooftops, leaving tiny silver drops that hung from telephone wires. Walter Briggs liked days like this. They made the town seem even slower, as if the world had agreed to whisper for a while. He was sitting at his kitchen table when the sound of the mail truck drifted up the street. A moment later, an envelope slid through the slot and landed neatly on the worn rug by the door. He finished his tea before bending down to pick it up. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar at first, neat, careful letters, but when he saw the return address, his mouth curved into a quiet smile. It was from Danny. He sat back down, tore the envelope carefully along the edge, and unfolded the letter. The paper was lined, and the words ran steady across it. "Yat, I hope you're doing well. We've been meaning to visit. The kids ask about you. Work's busy, but we might take a trip next month if the weather holds. There's a new train line running near here. You'd like it. Makes me think of home every night when I hear it. Walter read it twice, then a third time. He could almost hear Danny's voice again, older now, but still with that same steady tone. He set the letter down and stared at it for a long while. The house felt a little less quiet. He spent the rest of the afternoon in small, ordinary chores, polishing a picture frame, mending the loose hinge on the porch door, sweeping away the leaves that had gathered along the steps. Each sound, the broom's scrape, the rattle of the hinges, fit perfectly into the hush of the day. When evening came, the clouds thinned, and a pale golden light spilled through the yard. He thought about what to cook, but ended up slicing an apple instead. He ate slowly, listening to the steady drip of rainwater from the roof gutter. He kept glancing at the letter on the table. He didn't write back right away. Maybe tomorrow, he told himself. Maybe after the train. By the time the clock reached 11, the world outside was still and silver. The puddles on the street glowed faintly under the streetlights. He stepped onto the porch, blanket folded over his shoulders, and sat down in his old chair. The wood was cool from the rain, but he didn't mind. He looked toward the dark line of trees where the tracks ran, hidden in the valley. A faint wind stirred. Then, right on time, he heard it, the first distant murmur of wheels on steel. The midnight train was coming. He smiled, the letters still fresh in his mind. Danny's words had traveled across states, across years, to reach this quiet place. And now here was another message, in its own way, the steady, familiar sound of the train reminding him that time always moves, but never hurries. The rumble grew, then softened again, weaving through the night air. He closed his eyes, feeling the rhythm of it under his feet. For a moment, he imagined his son hearing the same thing. Miles away, different tracks, same hum. Maybe Danny stood at his own window some nights, coffee in hand, thinking of the same sound that shaped their lives. It comforted Walter to think so. The train was a thread that tied everything together, past and present, father and son, all the quiet nights between. As the sound faded, Walter whispered softly, "See you soon." He wasn't sure if he meant the train or his son. Maybe both. The porch light flickered in a small breeze. He stayed there long after the last echo disappeared, letting the cool air settle around him. When he finally stood to go inside, the letter was still waiting on the kitchen table. He picked it up once more, folded it carefully, and placed it in the wooden box beside Martha's photograph. It belonged there with all the other things worth keeping. Upstairs, the house creaked gently, as if settling for the night. Walter climbed the steps slowly, one hand on the rail, his thoughts steady and soft. In bed, he could still hear the faint rhythm in his mind. The wheels turning, the rails singing, the whisper of something constant moving through a changing world. He smiled in the dark. The sound followed him into sleep. A week drifted by in a quiet rhythm that belonged only to Elmswood. The days came softly, one after another, marked by the same small sounds. The groan of the screen door, the kettle's whistle, the shuffle of the mail truck at noon. Walter Briggs liked the sameness. It made each sunrise feel familiar, like a page he already knew how to read. On Friday morning, the sky was pale and clean after a night of rain. He stood by the window with his coffee and thought about Danny's letter again. The words had stayed with him. "We might visit next month." He smiled at the thought of company. Maybe he'd bake a pie. Martha's old recipe was still tucked in the cookbook by the stove. He could already imagine the laughter of children running through the yard, the screen door banging the way it used to. After breakfast, he walked to the edge of town for a few groceries. The walk was slow but pleasant. The scent of wet soil, the soft rumble of a tractor somewhere beyond the trees. At the small store, the clerk greeted him by name, as everyone did. He bought coffee, apples, and a fresh jar of jam, then stopped for a moment at the bulletin board near the door. Someone had pinned up an old photograph of the Elmswood Depot, taken decades earlier. He recognized himself in it, standing near the freight car, young, clean-shaven, wearing his uniform cap. He laughed quietly. He hadn't thought about that cap in years. Back home, he hung his coat and placed the groceries neatly on the counter. He poured another cup of coffee and carried it outside. The air had turned warm. Robins hopped along the grass, tugging at worms. He thought of how everything in life moved at its own pace. Seasons, people, trains. You couldn't rush them, and you didn't need to. When evening came, he cooked a simple supper and sat by the window until the sky darkened. He didn't turn on the radio or the television. The silence felt complete in itself, the kind of quiet that made every small sound, the ticking clock, the faint rustle of wind, feel alive. Just before midnight, he stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked their usual greeting. He settled into his chair, blanket over his knees, and waited. Out beyond the valley, the first faint tremor came. The midnight train, steady, unhurried, was making its way through the hills. He smiled as always. It came right on time. Tonight the sound felt a little different, though. Softer maybe, or maybe he was just listening more closely. He could hear the long, low hum of the engine, the gentle rattle of cars trailing behind, the hollow echo as the wheels crossed the bridge. He closed his eyes. The noise filled the space around him, wrapping the night in motion. He thought about everything that had passed. Martha, Danny, the depot, the years of sitting here through summer heat and winter frost. Each sound of that train was a reminder that life had never really stopped moving. It had simply changed its pace. The rumble began to fade. He leaned back, rocking slightly, and whispered, "Safe travels, my friend." For a moment, he stayed perfectly still, listening for the last faint hum as it slipped into the distance. Then he opened his eyes and looked toward the dark horizon. The clouds had parted, and a clear moon shone above the valley, bright enough to silver the rails far away. He breathed in deeply, the night air cool and clean. He felt grateful for the quiet, for the letter, for the sound that had kept him company through so many years. When he finally stood, his knees stiff but steady, he took one last glance at the stars. He thought of Danny and a new train line miles away. Maybe at this very moment his son was listening too. Maybe two trains were moving through two different nights, carrying the same rhythm across the miles between them. The idea made him smile. He went inside, turned off the porch light, and climbed the stairs. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the moon through the curtains. He paused by the small wooden box on the dresser, where Martha's photo and Danny's letter rested together. He placed his hand on it for a second. "See you soon," he said quietly. Then he lay down, the bed springs sighing beneath him. Through the open window, the night breeze carried the last, faintest echo of the train, so distant now it might have been a dream. Walter closed his eyes. The sound slipped gently into silence, and Elmswood slept. My story ends here for today. We'll meet again tomorrow. Good night, everyone.